Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our Sunday school class on the topic of Christianity and technology. This morning, we have another lesson by Art Hunt, where he will be examining the big ideas of Neil Postman.
All right, let's go ahead and get started this morning. The last time that we met together, I used a passage of Scripture as sort of a prayer, getting into our lesson. And I'm going to do that again today. This is from Exodus chapter 31. And I think this is a very Postman-esque quotation from the Bible. Postman, by the way, was a Jewish man and a cultural conservative Jewish man. The verse is from Exodus chapter 31, verse 18. And he gave to Moses, when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, 2 tablets of the testimony, tables of stone written with the finger of God. Back in the early 1990s, Neil Postman and Camille Pagula, sort of a feminist, neo-pagan personality. She was an art historian in Pennsylvania. And they sat Neil Postman and Camille Pagula down at a New York restaurant, and they put a microphone in front of them, Harper's Magazine, and recorded a conversation. And the title of the article that appeared in Harper's Magazine was, "He Wants His Book, She Wants Her TV." It was a great article. In fact, my book, which we do have some copies over there, is really an amplification of that conversation held between Neil Postman and Camille Pagula back in the early 1990s. Neil Postman began that article by saying that Moses' injunction that we read in the book of Exodus is proof that we should turn off the TV and go do our homework. And so today we're going to talk about the ideas of Neil Postman, and I would like to begin with a story from my own life. My father-in-law, he used to keep a loaded shotgun in the corner of his closed-in back porch in the back of his little house, nestled in a 180 acre wooded homestead in Tennessee. And one day, after finished walking his property, I returned to the house to find my 5-year-old son suddenly appear around the corner with the shotgun pointed directly at me. Now, I knew my father-in-law, Billy, usually would take the shells out of the gun whenever we came to visit. But I could tell that something was different when I heard Billy say, "Now, son, I want you to slowly lower that gun off of your father." Billy then took the gun away from him, and he returned it to its corner while ejecting the shells. Who knows what goes on in the mind of a 5-year-old when they point a loaded shotgun at their father? About every year, 500 people in the United States die from accidental gun shootings. And I'm glad that I was not one of them. But a fundamental principle of media ecology is that new technologies sometimes have unintended consequences. We might even call this principle the principle of not knowing the gun was loaded. Now, I mentioned that word media ecology. You might be asking yourself right now, what in the world is media ecology? Well, you may not know it, but you may be a media ecologist. How would you answer these questions? Do you think that the invention of the phonetic alphabet influenced Athenian democracy? We have a linguistic sitting in the front row. who could probably answer that question. Do you think that the Protestant Reformation could have taken place without the help of the printing press? Do you think that the invention of the telescope shaped the way we view the world? Do you think television changed the nature of political discourse? If you answered yes to these questions, you just might be a media ecologist yourself. Because these are the kinds of questions that we like to ask. Simply stated, media ecology is the study of media as environments. Don't let the biological metaphor scare you. Media, plural of medium. Media ecologists define medium broadly, which can include a wide range of artifacts and phenomenon, everything from language to writing to electronic media to architecture to classrooms to the way that we dress. Ecology, the science of the relationships between organisms and their environments. Biological ecology assumes that organisms are dependent upon their environments. It also assumes that all ecosystems are interdependent. So media ecology focuses on human environments, those places where we live and move and have our being. So an environment has the capacity to tell us what's permissible and what is not permissible. Think, for example, of a courtroom as an environment. Think of the removal of the wolves from Yellowstone National Park and what happened after that and why they had to bring them back. Now, history is chock full of examples of the principle, I didn't know the gun was loaded. Walter Ong, one of the founding fathers of media ecology, along with Marshall McLuhan and Neil Postman, he has shown us how technology, specifically the technology of writing, transform human consciousness by detaching thought from the author, allowing it to stand alone to be judged by its own merits. Neil Postman said, the convention of freezing speech through writing gave birth to the grammarian, the logician, the rhetorician, the historian, the scientist, all those who must hold language before them so they can see what it means, where it errs, and where it is leading. Media ecologists, as well as other astute observers of history, have shown us, and they know that technology is not a zero-sum game, but rather it's a two-edged sword. Technology gives, and it takes away. I can give you lots of examples of this. The invention of the clock allowed monks to start their prayers all at the same time. But it also created the idea of moment by moment and diverted us from keeping time more slowly with the rhythms of the day and the seasons. The assembly line allowed us to make furniture faster and cheaper. But the Industrial Revolution brought an end to the home as a primary economic unit. Most of us now work for somebody else. The automobile allowed us to get from one point to another much faster, but it also severed community and family ties like no other invention of its time. The automobile restructured our physical landscape, giving us sprawl and seas of asphalt and rows upon rows of McDonald yellow arches. The atomic bomb abruptly ended World War II and probably saved millions of lives, my father being one of them. But it also introduced the ever-present reality that we can blow ourselves up quite easily. A number of years ago, the comedian Bob Hope captured the great irony of technological innovation when he said, "It's a wonderful world. It might destroy itself, but at least you'll be able to watch it on TV." One thing I have noticed over the years is that many Reformed leaders have recommended reading Neil Postman. In fact, years ago, James Montgomery Boyce, pastor of 10th Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia, came here. Some of you might remember this. And said, "You need to read Neil Postman." So I'd like to feel in this lesson today that this circle is coming around now a little bit. The reason that Reformed folks think that you should read Neil Postman is because, first, he's a Jewish, culturally conservative man, and he understood very well the connection between literacy and democracy's vital institutions, which include the press, education, politics, and religion. Postman also knew what would happen to our culture if we made technology into a god. And he wrote a book about this. It's called Technopoly. But I'd like to begin with his best-known book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. So we owe a great debt to Neil Postman for clearly articulating the unintended consequences of television in his book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business. It still remains a classic text in the field of media ecology since its publication in 1985. Now, Postman could have just as easily titled the book Television. We didn't know the gun was loaded. Now, Postman's basic thesis was that television, as a dominant communication medium, shaped other important cultural institutions in its own image. Television was the culmination of other technologies that came before it, specifically telegraphy, which broke the barriers of time and space in transmitting a message. Because before the invention of telegraphy, how fast could a message travel? As fast as a horse or a man walking or a boat. But after the invention of telegraphy, a message could travel from New York to San Francisco in a second. That's radical. So that's the first invention. The second invention was that of photography, which decontextualized information by giving us suddenly an abundance of images, often disassociated from the objects from which they came. We call this the graphic revolution. Daniel Boorstin wrote a book about it called The Image. So, taken together, telegraphy and photography created a kind of peekaboo world, a child's game that is endlessly entertaining, and also at the same time, it attacked the coherence of that old word-based mode of communication that we had gotten used to in print media because of the invention of the printing press. Now, key to understanding Postman's thesis is the role that books and pamphlets and newspapers played in the founding of American democracy. Because early on, American democracy possessed what he called a typographical mind. That is, a mind shaped by the habit of reading. This kind of person, Postman says, had the, quote, sophisticated ability to think conceptually, deductively, and sequentially, a high value of reason and order, an abhorrence of contradiction, a large capacity for detachment and objectivity, and a tolerance for delayed response. But then television came along and it disrupted these capacities. So television became the nexus, the dominant medium of public discourse. And it changed those very important cultural institutions, such as journalism. Journalism, which, by the way, our founding fathers believed was very, very important, even giving it the title of the fourth estate of government, as some have come to call it. Journalism, when television came along, was put in a position of having to mimic the entertainment values associated with television, where the camera lens rarely stayed focused on its subject for more than a few seconds. So when we watch the news, we may see the mugshot of an alleged murderer. We might see a dancing raccoon. We might see a sales pitch for Viagra. And we might see the president embarking off the White House lawn in his helicopter, all in the course of just several minutes. Postman appropriately titles his chapter on journalism, "Now This," and "Now This," and "Now This." Peekaboo. So television, Postman would say, trivializes information. And he would also say this is true in the political realm. Any national political candidate must now think about how image penetration is as much or more important than a particular political platform. I think Postman would agree that a turning point was reached when Richard Nixon appeared on Laugh-In 1968, 4 years before the Watergate scandal. And he said in front of millions of people, "Sock it to me." They did. And of course, every political candidate that comes along must play to the screen. The introduction of Donald Trump, former host of The Apprentice, no matter what your politics are, the introduction of Trump into the American political sphere would not have surprised Postman at all. In fact, Postman's son, Andrew, was quick to point out in an opinion piece in The Guardian that the 2016 election was really a vindication of amusing ourselves to death. If television trivializes information, as Postman suggests, then the way that we educate children also becomes susceptible to these entertainment values. Postman says that Sesame Street does not encourage children to love school or anything about school, but rather it encourages them to love television. Television's primary contribution to the educational philosophy is that the idea of teaching and entertainment are inseparable. One of the things that I find most perceptive about Postman is his analysis of what television has done and how it has influenced religion. The first thing that he says about this is that preachers who use television to advance their message must conform to the entertainment values of television. which has a way of stripping the message of its sacredness. Because television is a very secular medium. As with educational institutions, religious institutions begin to think that worship and entertainment are inseparable. Postman says, I believe I am not mistaken in saying that Christianity is a demanding and serious religion. When it is delivered as easy and amusing, it is another kind of religion altogether. Postman sums up his book by saying, when a population becomes distracted by trivia, when cultural life is redefined as a perpetual round of entertainments, when serious public conversation becomes a form of baby talk, when, in short, a people become an audience and their public become a vaudeville act, then a nation finds itself at risk. Culture death is a clear possibility. Now, one might think that Postman's thesis bears little relevance to our own times because it was written 40 years ago, when television was the dominant medium of public discourse. But I think Postman's thesis is still relevant for us today for several reasons. First, television has not gone away, though its avenues of access have proliferated. A good segment of the population still gets its information from television. Television is used for political, educational, and religious discourse still as well. Second, another reason, the rules of television, which are essentially vaudevillian, have carried over to other digital platforms in the process of media convergence. The way that we consume information and the way that we conduct our public discourse is still very much a game of peekaboo. Third, Postman gave us some really good tools to understanding the relationship between how we communicate and its effect on the creation of the culture. Although culture is a creation primarily of speech, it is created anew by every medium of communication that comes down the pike, which, of course, Marshall McLuhan recognized. Whether we're talking about the phonetic alphabet or the printed word or television or digital media. Postman continues to remind us that the gun is loaded. Whenever Postman received criticism that he was being anti-technology, he would always respond by saying that he wasn't, and that to be anti-technology is like being anti-food. And this is because he knew, as did Marshall McLuhan, that all technologies are extensions of our bodies. The fork is an extension of the hand. Your chair is an extension of your spine. Your car is an extension of your foot. By way of review, what is electronic media an extension of? Central nervous system, according to McLuhan. In other words, electronic devices are very powerful extensions. Ones that corporations now design to be addictive so that the customer will keep coming back. And this is a loaded gun if there ever was one. Think about the social consequences of iPhone. While the iPhone and other similar digital devices have given us a wonderful sense of power and convenience that human beings have never known, the evidence is now pretty compelling that there is a correlation between teen social media usage and teen depression. There's generally no argument about this. Psychologist Jean Twenge at San Diego State University has perhaps done more than anyone to draw attention to this problem. She's not the only one, but she is a major figure in this. She says that clinical level depression doubled between 2011 and 2019 for U.S. teens. And this is the period that we began putting cell phones in the hands of teenagers. She says clinical level depression doubled between 2011 and 2019 for U.S. teens. According to a 2021 Centers of Disease Control and Prevention report, 57% of high school girls say that they feel persistently sad and hopeless. As for high school boys, 29% feel persistently sad and hopeless. Furthermore, 30% of teenage girls have attempted suicide. When I taught at the University of Tennessee at Martin, we actually invited Dr. Twenge to come and speak to our freshman class. She's a very dynamic speaker. But do you know what many of our students were doing as she was giving her presentation? They were on their smartphones. Think about the changes wrought upon the political landscape due to digital media. The algorithms connected to our media favorites tend to reinforce our political biases. We live inside our self-sought media bubbles. We can't agree on the facts. Who won the election anyway? Biden? Trump? Well, we all have our alternative truth. That's an oxymoron if there ever was one. Very postmodern. Think about the demise of newspapers and what role they played in our founding of our democracy. I actually worked at a newspaper in Clarksville, Tennessee, met my wife at a newspaper. Big newspaper, but I visited there not too long ago, and now it's just become a shell of what it once. The oldest newspaper in Tennessee, the Leaf Chronicle. It's just a shell of what it once was. But our founders were very aware that a literate, informed, and engaged public would actually safeguard the country against tyranny. Think about digital media and how it's changed our sense of privacy. And this is a sword that cuts both ways. First, we share more of our private intimacies online than, and we think nothing of it. Second, corporations then mine this information, this behavior, and what some people are now calling the new surveillance capitalism. Of course, China now has a social credit system that determines the degree to which its citizens can buy, sell, and travel. And is fast becoming what journalist John Lanchester calls AI-powered techno-totalitarian state. Now, all of this is eerily reminiscent of George Orwell's 1984. People like to ask which anti-utopian novel is more prophetic, George Orwell's 1984 or Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Postman believed that Huxley's vision was more prophetic. But I am of the opinion that there are actually more similarities between these two novels than there are differences. Of course, both envision a bleak future. Both describe the triumph of totalitarianism in a world from which transcendent values have disappeared. Both grapple with the problem of historical dementia, the collapse of the traditional family, the loss of the Christian ethos, and the surrender of the culture to the god of technology. While one novel gives us a totalitarian state with a sad face, and the other a totalitarian state with a happy face, they both describe authoritarian states of the highest degree. You will not find the elements of liberal democracy in either one of them. And now I would like to turn to another important book by Neil Postman, one we do not have out, by the way. But I would encourage you, if you like the writings of Postman and you're reading Amusing Ourselves to Death and you want to read more, I would encourage you to read Technopoly, The Surrender of Culture to Technology. And in this book, Postman outlines 3 periods of history in relation to technology. 3. They're called tool using, technocracies, and technopolies. Let me just briefly cover each one of them. First, tool using. Tool using societies use their inventions to solve daily problems. That's what technology does. So the water mill, the windmill, the heavy-wheeled plow, these are examples of technologies in this period. We also think of the building of castles and the great cathedrals, which required stone-cutting tools and pulley systems and a certain degree of ingenuity. Now, Postman says that these tools did not threaten the culture, or it did not threaten religion very much at all. But then we get to the second period. In a technocracy, tools came to play a more central role. Postman would say that at this period, tools actually came to attack the culture. That is, their traditions, their social mores, their myths, their politics, their rituals, and their religions. We've already said that the clock restructured the rhythms of the day and the seasons. The telescope moved Earth from the center of the universe and cast it in orbit around the sun. We've also mentioned the effects of the printing press and how it helped facilitate the Protestant Reformation. Despite these kinds of attacks on the previous culture before these inventions came along, life's meaning, Postman says, still was not reduced so that it was located in machinery and in technique. However, in a technopoly, all forms of cultural life have surrendered to the sovereignty of technology. What we might call technology with a capital T. In America, this shift was tied to the Industrial Revolution, our distrust of cultural restraints, and our modern notions of progress. Morse, Bell, Edison, Rockefeller, Ford, sometimes these individuals are referred to as the robber barons. They set the precedent for today's capitalists with the idea that nothing, absolutely nothing, should stand in the way of technological innovation. For right now, we're going to stop right here. We wanted to have a period of question and answers. But next week, we're going to dig a little deeper into some of these ideas associated with technopoly. But what I would like to do right now is just open things up for questions.
So what's the balance?
I'm glad you asked that question. I have a book that I wrote that's not over there. It's called Finding Balance in Our New Technological Environments. I'm going to answer that question next week. But I'll go ahead and give a little prelude to it. We do have to find balance. Because if we don't, technology will just roll over us.
Yeah, I was going to say that almost seems like a setup question. My mind was closely related to that. So what's the good news? But that's a similar type question.
I know that this sounds a little bleak, and Postman is very much, as a public intellectual, he had a gerrymander in the sense that he was talking about where things were headed. You'll remember that last week we said that Marshall McLuhan was a hard technological determinist. Postman wasn't. Postman was a soft technological determinist, which means that he did believe that new technologies, especially those that play a very important or central role in our public discourse, will shape that culture. But he also believed that we can do something about it. In fact, there are people in America who have done something about it. And they ride in black buggies. And I'm not suggesting that we go there. But we cannot just assume that these things won't affect us in some way.
So the next wave of technology is obviously artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Will you be addressing that?
I am. I'm only going to address it for a little bit next time, but my understanding, and Kyle can talk to this, we're going to have some special lessons on this.
Yeah, to follow up on that. So on July 14th, we're going to have a special combined Sunday school class with all the classes in here for a guest teacher who's a PCA ruling elder from Starkville named Jonathan Barlow. He's going to lead an entire lesson on the topic of artificial intelligence. And then the following Sunday, I'll be teaching a lesson on artificial intelligence. So that's a big part of this class.
Yeah. So I will just only whet your appetite a little bit next week.
I think you should comment for us on Ecclesiastes and how it seems like to me it fits here, but I would like a little more clarification and just
You'll have to help me
elaboration.
with what you're referring to in Ecclesiastes, whether there's nothing new under the sun or something else.
Vanity.
Vanity of vanities, all is vanity, saith the preacher. Well, as a Calvinist, I agree very much with the French reformer who said that the human mind is an idol factory. And we have made technology into a god in our culture. I mean, that's the thrust of Postman's book, Technopoly. We've surrendered ourselves to it so that we're not willing to say, well, suppose we didn't do this. Things have been set in motion because of our views of progress that we have to embrace every technological change or innovation that comes along. And not only that, we think it's good.
Art, I have a question regarding the positive aspects of technology. You spoke of the printing press. Obviously, the Reformation flowed from that. You kind of skipped over radio as an advent of technology, but the broadcast potential of projecting the good news of the gospel into places where people could not be.
Sure.
Obviously, television taints that to some degree, but I think of the efforts of Third Mill and their broadcasting, in essence, seminary-level education into the world of the internet, where it can be accessed by many millions, probably hundreds of millions, that would not otherwise have no access to it, and the potential multiplication of the gospel. So it seems to me there's a somewhat of a dark view from Postman about the potential of technology in our, as you said, in our surrender to it. But I wonder if you could comment on the positive aspects
Yes,
of how
I
we
very
utilize it.
much appreciate that question. as we said before, technology is a two-edged sword. It cuts both ways. It gives and it takes away. Technology has given us many, many benefits. A longer lifespan is one of the things that technology has given to us. As far as mass media, yes, very quickly evangelicals and even Catholics embraced mass media as a means to extend and to preach the gospel. And it has been used in that way, and to good effect. I think Postman would say that television was unique as an image-based medium that had to follow the rules of television. And the rules of television says that the camera only stays on a subject for a short period of time before moving to something else. The rules of television says that even serious conversations become trivialized or dramatized in such a way that it affects the seriousness of it. So when we watch the weather, let's say, televised weather, the weatherman, at least if you can recall your years of watching television and the weather, that the weatherman becomes sort of a jolly figure, and you can even think of national weather people. And so whenever there's a storm, we got to have that image of that weather person standing knee deep in the in the sea as the rains are coming. We want that dramatic aspect. So each medium has its own particular bias. Radio had its own bias. Film has its own bias. Television has its own bias. The internet has its own bias. And so wisdom dictates that we understand those biases. Should we, for example, put our worship service up on the internet an hour after the service? Well, that's a question that elders of the church have to think about. Because even though we think we're being convenient or that we're helping the shut-ins or whatever, there are other consequences to that. Just think of during COVID, the consequences of broadcasting the service. There are some people who stopped going to church during that time, and they think, well, I can just now stay at home and watch the service. That's a consequence. And unless we think about it, we're not using our wisdom about it.
So, Art, are you going to get into the role of parents
Yes.
in managing this?
A little bit, and more than me, others will also be addressing that.
Because I read a really disturbing article in the Wall Street Journal this weekend about a mom that helped her daughter become a media influencer on Instagram, and starting at 15, and then when she got into high school. And the disturbing thing was the statistics of her followers were 92% men. And the mom started rationalizing that away so that her daughter could get more sponsors and money and stuff. So it's just was really disturbing.
Yeah, there is this dark underbelly of the internet that we don't even like to think about, whether we're talking about pornography or we're talking about predatory behavior of people seeking out young children for their devious purposes. It's there, yeah.
I had a point in your talk that kind of went over my head about the phonetic alphabet. Are
Yeah.
you referring to
Yeah, sure. All right. So
cuneiform
imagine
and-
Homer and the Odyssey. So how was Homer transmitted before the invention of the Athenian alphabet? How was it? I want to put this on Kyle maybe a little bit. Since he's our linguistic guy here. We'll have a little dialogue. So before the alphabet, how were stories and narratives transmitted?
Orally.
Yeah, they were done orally. So here comes the alphabet. comes along, and now we have frozen speech. So we can put it down on paper, and we can see it. And as McLuhan would say, this was like a bomb going off for Athenian democracy. It allowed us to do things that we had never done before when it came to managing bureaucracies and that sort of thing. So Athenian democracy was kind of housed within Greek city-states, but we saw the birth of nationalism, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, because, to a large degree, because of the invention of the phonetic alphabet, McLuhan would say. And then, when the printing press came along, of course, this is McLuhan, the Roman Catholic, talking, that 100 megaton bomb went off, radically changing Europe with the Protestant Reformation. Now, as a Catholic, McLuhan would probably not feel very good about that. Postman, as a Jewish man, understood the realities of it. Postman, although he appreciated and acknowledged the role of religion in culture as a cultural conservative, he was also somewhat of a child of the Enlightenment as well. So both the Enlightenment and the Reformation valued print-oriented society. Yes?
Just a couple quick questions. Would Postman's thought fall under the heading of post-liberal?
Postman wrote some other books on education and on language. And he was a bit upset with some of the trends regarding language and what we would think of as postmodern thought in regarding language. He did not like it. He did not like it.
Oh, was there any perceived downside to having a phonetic alphabet, for instance?
Well, it depends on how much you valued or thought those oral cultures of, how important they were. It is what it is. But I think to answer that question, you have to think of the history of Israel and what God did. Who were the first people of the book? Yeah, it was Moses who gave us the written word, written by the finger of God. And so by just this very fact, we are a word-based religion, both Judaism and Christianity, whether we like it or not. Think of the Puritans. They were people of the book. What did the Puritans do? As soon as they got here to America, what did they do? They founded institutions of higher learning. Why? So they could teach the people how to read, so the people could read the Bible by themselves. And this is why Postman is very much is favored by Reformed folk. I addressed a lot of these issues in my book, The Vanishing Word. So feel free to pick up a copy if you'd like. We have time for one more question. Yes.
All right, Art, let me just, I'll try to make this. I had 3 quick observations I thought maybe you could react to. You may have to save them for next week. So,
okay,
anyway.
all right.
Number 1, it seems to me that the technological capability of the technologies, particularly having to do with, communication and receipt of information. We often talk about, things in terms of having a lot of thrust and no vector, okay? In a world where, basically we are following a Christian worldview, well, that provides the vector and the technology is the thrust. So you can thrust into something really good or you can thrust into something really bad, but if without the vector of the Christian worldview, then it's going to become an idol factory and we're going to go quickly into evil. So that was kind of observation number 1. Observation number 2 was, in not just this country, but across the world, it seems to me, and what sparked it when you mentioned the death of the newspapers is that there has been an erosion to the point of complete decay, in my mind, of a fundamental commitment to the truth.
Yes.
And as soon as there is not a fundamental commitment to the truth, then all of this just turns into a massively powerful propaganda system. And so, and you can see it in how people react. For instance, I'll bet if I said that I think the most important Supreme Court case in the last century is a case called Missouri versus Biden, I'll bet you almost nobody knows what that is. Well, what that has to do with is the government, it doesn't matter which administration, but it has to be the government through 10 agencies suppressing some viewpoints and elevating others rather than letting people choose in the marketplace of ideas what they think is true or false. And it's essentially an advocacy thing. And so here's my observation or proposition, maybe you could react to it, is that I think one of the most important things people can do is first to realize that they are living in a propaganda network, and that it's more like, The Matrix is more like a documentary than a drama. And they have to first realize that before they can then second realize, I have to fight for the truth because I am constantly being lied to in more and more powerful ways than ever before.
Yes. Boy, there's a lot there, and I'm going to answer it shortly and hopefully talk about it more next time. This is why I think that Orwell's 1984 and Huxley's Brave New World need to be read together. So if you're reading them in high school, if you're a teacher and you want your students to read two anti-utopian novels, they need to read both of those at the same time, whether it's high school or college. Propaganda is a part of both of those. Of course, when Adolf Hitler came to power, what was he doing? He was saying, let's burn the books, and you guys just follow me. It was a very pagan notion. The pagan ethos was there with Adolf Hitler. And Hitler would not, Hitler came to power two ways. Number one, through brute intimidation, which was the stick, and also through a very sophisticated propaganda machine, which was the carrot. And we are destined to repeat those same mistakes again if we don't take responsibility of ourselves and as citizens of our country. I would say a lot more, but I'll just say one more thing. There's two ways to look at communication. First, the transmissional view, the extension of messages in time and space for the purpose of control. That's a legitimate way to look at communication. But there's another way of looking at communication, and that is the sharing of beliefs and symbols for the purpose of maintaining society. So one would say we should preach the gospel to all the nations. That's the extension of messages in time and space for the purpose of control. But the other one is nestled, let's say, in the sacrament of communion, that we use this communication symbol as a way to maintain our shared beliefs. We have to hold those two views in balance as well. I'm going to stop there.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Art. How about I close us in prayer? Heavenly Father, we do thank you for this opportunity to hear from Art, to learn about the challenges of mass communication and media and entertainment. And I pray, Lord, that this would be an opportunity for us to examine our own hearts, for us to consider the ways that we have been influenced, perhaps unknowingly or unwittingly, by modern technological innovations, the television, the smartphone. And we do pray, Lord, that you would give us wisdom as we navigate our own cultural waters. And so we do thank you, Lord, for the opportunity to learn about these topics in this class. And we thank you now, Lord, for the opportunity to enter into corporate worship together to glorify your name. And so we do love you, Lord, and we give you the glory in Christ's name. Amen.